Minister Hardeep Singh Puri, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you. Good to be back.
It's great to have you on the show. Let me begin by asking you about your boss, Prime Minister Modi's grand ambition to have India become a fully developed nation, as he puts it, by 2047, to mark the centenary of India's modern nationhood. It's a grand ambition, but in all honesty, it's not possible, is it?
Not possible. I think it's going to be made possible well before the 100 years of independence are over. Let me set out, if you permit, my vision of what is at stake and what is doable realistically. We're already the fifth largest economy in the world. According to the Monetary Fund, the IMF, we should be the fourth largest during 2025, and possibly, if current rates of growth are maintained, the third largest economy before 2027.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt about the size.
Now it comes.
The size of your economy is beyond dispute, and the power of having 1.4, soon to be 1.5 billion
1.4, yes,
is enormous.
Yes.
No question. But economists reckon that to become fully developed, to use that phrase, i.e. to have a GDP per capita close to that of, say, Western Europe or the United States, you would need to grow by between 9 and 10% every single year to 2047. And that is not possible.
Let me put it to you differently. The size of the GDP is not in question. I ask you a counter question. Where has the developed country been defined? Point one. I mean, I know of no definition in the multilateral system. I know of countries being termed developing countries. I know of countries being termed least developed countries, and there is a listing of them. There's a system by which you graduate from being a least developed country to a developing country. Development has to be all comprehensive. I think in many respects we are already better developed than some of the so-called developed countries, because it costs much less to provide those basic amenities in India.
But I ask you the broad question because you are a key minister responsible for energy, in your case petroleum and natural gas, in this country. And if India is indeed to continue on this extraordinary growth path that you outline, then India's energy needs are going to be enormous. In fact, they're going to dominate global energy markets to a very real extent. It's going to leave India very energy dependent on outside energy sources, is it not?
Not really. India is both a large consumer and it's also a producer. Your assessment that if you have to become a developed country, you need a lot of energy is absolutely correct. But I could point to examples in history where the energy availability has been lacking and have to resource from outside, Japan being a case in point, but I won't go down that road. Today, our energy consumption is 5.5 million barrels a day, crude oil consumption.
Yeah, and that is likely to go. Pretty much 90% of your oil needs come from outside India.
From outside. But our domestic E&P, or exploration and production, which was neglected earlier, is now dramatically on the rise. Point one. Our biofuel blending, as our consumption goes up, our refining goes up, on an expanding base, we are increasing our biofuel production, which next month will be 20%. So 20% of all the fuel consumed at the bunk is biofuel, which is all indigenous, domestic.
Well, you can talk about biofuels, you can talk about your grand plans for offshore oil exploration, which, by the way, the International Energy Agency has poured a lot of cold water on. But let us face facts. Right now, you are hugely dependent on supplies of relatively cheap oil from Russia. And that, I would suggest to you, makes you geopolitically very vulnerable.
Well, even for the sake of an argument, even just to carry on the discussion, I think those facts are not correct. We have diversified our sources of supply, which hitherto were 27. We are importing from 39 countries, and
if I may, last year almost 40% of your oil imports came from Vladimir Putin's Russia.
At one point it was 38%, it's coming down. But today, Stephen, the availability of oil, nobody is vulnerable to external oil. There's more oil coming on the international market. It's not what something I'm saying. Where the IEA is right is that of the total demand increase in the next 2 decades, 25% will come from India. On that, they are totally correct. But today, there's more oil in the market than there are takers.
But let's just talk about the short term. You made this big bet on taking cheap oil from Russia against the wishes of the United States and your
not against the wishes. I'm sorry, this is not against the wishes. The United States was.
It most certainly was against the wishes.
Not at
of the
all.
United
Not at
States.
all. Let me enlighten you. What the United States told us and told many others is that they wanted us to buy as much oil from Russia as we liked, as long as we bought it at a reasonable price. And that was music to my ears. There is no sanction on Russian oil then or now. None whatsoever.
Well, there's new sanctions now. Let's just talk about them.
Let me first.
All right, well, you made that point. Let's just talk about what Joe Biden did before he left office. He put new sanctions on Russian oil, including new sanctions on the shadow fleet of tankers that is ferrying oil as we speak from Russia to India. Many of the vessels that you relied on will no longer be able to operate. Some in India are calling this an oil shock for your country.
I'm not aware of anyone who has even a nodding acquaintance with the energy market calling this an oil shock. Let me share with you what actually has happened. There have never been sanctions on Russian energy per se. Russian oil coming or gas coming through a pipeline to Hungary has been exempt all along. Russian energy going through a pipeline to Japan has been exempt. And today also, Europe is buying 20-25% of its gas from Russia. So what the Americans, I was active, I was the negotiator then, said buy as much as you like, buy it reasonable. There was something called a price cap. Now it's music to my ears. If I can buy some from some source and I can buy it at a cheaper price, we are the winners.
Minister, let's get back to the point about the shadow fleet of tankers.
No, not at all. Let me tell you. Because
let me just tell you. I hope you have a plan for what you're going to do when these tankers can't deliver you the oil.
Because if your assumptions are wrong, then you come to the wrong argumentation. First of all, the fleet doesn't bother us at all. We do not use fleets. We issue tenders at the point of importation. We will decide, one of our oil companies will decide, we want to import X amount of oil, global tender, whoever can supply it, delivered at our port. So if somebody has a fleet problem, it's their problem. Now, let me come back to the basic. Before February 2022, we imported 0.2% of oil from Russia. Today, it went up, but even in those last 2 years, sometimes Iraq was selling more. The main point to note is there is more oil coming on the global market, mostly from the Western Hemisphere, than there is need for that oil. So whenever there is a situation of more oil available, availability is not a problem and vulnerability does not arise.